Hello. Okay, so this is going to be my movie vlog, which is going to cover all the movies that I watched basically over the last week. Now, it's going to be more like 8 days. I'm going to basically talk about the movies that I watched from June 23rd up until yesterday, which was July 1st. So without further ado, I shall get started. Okay, so the first one that I watched was Piranha 3DD. 3 double D, that's right. This obviously is a sequel to Piranha 3D, came out a few years ago, and then obviously a remake of the 70s version. Now this movie I was not a fan of really at all. I believe that this was straight to video, and you can certainly detect why it was straight to video. Um, Relatively low budget film. It certainly could convey the direct video-esque sort of structure with regard to the production values and so forth. Now, the movie for the most part sucked. I will say that there were a few redeeming qualities, a few redeeming um, factors, and those dealt primarily with just like a few random scenes having to do with particularly David Hasselhoff, who was in the movie, and to a lesser extent, Ving Rhames, who returned from his role from Piranha 3D. David Hasselhoff actually did have a few funny one-liners, a few funny moments in this film, but a lot of it, he was in probably the last third of the movie, something like that, and they really tried really hard to actually implement him into the story, and I think that you could certainly detect that they were trying too hard, but there were a few instances where he was actually funny, but those were few and far between, so I certainly can't say that I recommend this movie. Probably stay away from it, actually. Unless you were a fan of Piranha 3D, you might want to check it out. But overall, I would say that I would probably give it like in between like a 2 and a 2.5 out of 5 stars. So don't watch it. The next one that I watched was Big Trouble in Little China. No, I've seen this before, but I was lucky enough to be able to join a few friends of mine to watch this at a midnight showing at a local theater. And watching it in sort of in that environment certainly brought out the sort of B movie slash fun I don't know, B movie quality or fun quality in the movie, watching it at midnight with an audience and so forth. So I certainly liked the movie this time more than I did the last few times that I watched it. Now it's been a while since I did see this movie, um, but there were a few things that I forgot about it. But for the most part, it's just a kick-ass, cheesy sort of action horror comedy B movie. To some extent B movie, but it's well done. Obviously, it's directed by John Carpenter. If you didn't know, just a really outrageous movie. A lot of fun. Kurt Russell is spectacular. Uh, Very funny, very charming, very entertaining. A lot of monsters, a lot of crazy, insane things happening throughout the running time if you haven't seen it. I assume that most people probably have seen this, but if you haven't, definitely check it out, especially if you're a fan of again, the type of 80s movies that I mentioned, and if you're a fan of John Carpenter, because it's definitely very Carpenter-esque. But overall, I would say I would probably give this one like 4 out of 5 stars. The experience is probably even better than that, but the film itself was probably 4, I would say. The next one that I watched was How to Train Your Dragon. Now, this really took me by surprise. This movie was fantastic, and oddly enough, I never really gave it a chance when it came out, and I'm not sure quite why that is or was. But it just didn't really strike me as something that seemed interesting at the time, but I'm certainly glad that I ended up watching it. Obviously, this is an animated feature, it just came out a few years ago, and it's strikingly powerful, and surprisingly so. I was extremely shocked at how affected I was by the story, by the characters, by the plot development, and everything involved. Really, I honestly am sometimes amazed at the ability of animation to sort of capture the human condition significantly more accurately and significantly better than their live action counterparts. It's very strange to me how this happens, but it actually did definitely happen. And How to Train Your Dragon was one film, one example that certainly is able to demonstrate that fact. Um, I think that it's probably much deeper than what it might initially seem on the surface. But again, highly recommend it. 4 out of 5 stars from me, maybe even 4.5. I really like this movie a lot. The next movie I watched was a movie that I rewatched. It was Freddy vs. Jason. Now, I hadn't seen this one since it initially came out in 2004, whenever it was. And I'll say that this movie is relatively entertaining for sort of um, the horror sequel, if you will. I can't say that I highly recommend it or that I can say that this is a movie that everyone's going to enjoy, but if you like the Friday the 13th series, if you're a big fan, or if you're a big fan of the Nightmare on Elm Street series, obviously, then you probably already have checked this out. But if you haven't, give it a whirl. It's not terrible for a sort of contemporary take on an old series or an old formula. I think that for the most part, it does a decent job of bringing the classic 80s. um, why can't I think of the type of film? Um, I don't know, but it does a decent job of conveying the 80s horror feel in a contemporary sort of setting. So probably would give this one 3 to 3.5 out of 5. Perhaps recommended. The next one that I watched, I'm actually embarrassing to admit to have watched, but I actually did rewatch this, so I've. It's even more embarrassing to say that I've actually watched this before and rewatched it. But it is the Beverly Hillbillies, and right, I'm ashamed. Basically, I was just sitting around, and this happened to be on one of the movie channels, and I was feeling lazy, so I left it on and just watched it. And it is what it is. Let me just say that. Um, Pretty absurd 90s or mid to late 90s comedy fare. Better than sort of 2005 to 2012 comedy fare, like the rom-com that's starting to really become so common in contemporary cinema, American cinema. But this movie is it can't come recommended by me. Probably like a 2 out of 5. Don't ask me why I watch this again because I don't really have an answer aside from just apathy and laziness. So not recommended, definitely not. But the next one that I watched makes up for the last one, and this is also a rewatch. But I rewatched Oldboy. This is the Chan Wook Park movie. Um, and this is just a masterpiece, a contemporary masterpiece. Um, if you haven't watched this movie, go out, rent it, download it, do whatever you have to do to get it and to see it because it's phenomenal. I really love this movie a lot. I loved it even more this time than I did the first time that I watched it. I love the whole series. There's 2 other movies. There's Lady Vengeance and Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance. Both of those are good, but this is the best out of the 3 in my view. Everything is just done really to perfection. Visually, the cinematography is fantastic. The characters are just you can empathize with them. Clearly, they're imperfect, but their imperfections, along with they're imperfect characters, but at the same time, again, you can certainly feel what it is that they're going through when they're going through them and so forth, when they're going through the situations that they run into. The story is just fantastic. It builds up to this sort of um, this ending that is just completely. It just seems to me very completely original and just something that you wouldn't expect, but something that's fantastic all the while. So, highly recommend it. I have to give this movie 5 stars, and I don't do that. I just don't do that. But I love this movie a lot, so I have to do it in this instance. The next one, this is the last one that I watched of the week. This was Gremlins Part 2, the new batch. Now, I had also seen this previously, but I hadn't seen this in probably like 10 to 15 years, so it's been a really long time. Now, this one, it wasn't quite as good as the original film, I would say, but in some ways, I think it surpassed the original, depending on what you're looking for when you go into the movie. If you're looking just for creatures and gremlins and just utter mayhem, then I think that this probably surpasses the original. There are a lot more gremlins in this one than there were in the original, and Joe Dante took a more offbeat comedic approach in this film. So whereas the first one, it was difficult to characterize in terms of it being horror versus comedy. This one pretty much just takes a completely comedic approach, and I think that it does it well. The movie is certainly entertaining. There are a lot of cameos throughout the movie, and it definitely will keep you entertained. Lots of creatures, obviously, which are very appealing to me. So I would say I give this one 3.5 out of 5. I do recommend it for most people. If you're just looking for a good time in a movie, then you'll probably like this movie. But that's all that I watched this week. I'll come back another week from today on Sunday, and we'll review some more movies. I'll let you know what I watched. So thanks for watching, and I shall see you in a week.